Most people believe that influence is earned through persistence. They think if they explain themselves clearly enough, care deeply enough, and remain constantly available, they will eventually become impossible to ignore. Yet human nature rarely rewards what is endlessly offered. It rewards what possesses discipline, boundaries, and quiet certainty. This is the paradox that many fail to understand. The greatest shift in any relationship does not occur when you speak louder. It begins the moment you no longer allow your emotions to dictate your behavior. Every person possesses an invisible center of gravity. It is the place from which confidence, judgment, and self-respect emerge. The moment that center begins revolving around another person's approval, power quietly changes hands. You stop making decisions based on reason and begin making them based on fear. Fear of losing attention, fear of rejection, fear of silence. At first, these fears appear harmless. You send one extra message. You explain yourself a little longer. You wait anxiously for a reply that should never have determined your peace of mind in the first place. Slowly, without realizing it, you surrender control over your own emotional state. Human beings are remarkably perceptive. They often sense emotional dependence long before it is spoken aloud. Neediness is rarely communicated through words alone. It reveals itself through urgency, overreaction, and the inability to remain still when uncertainty appears. The individual who constantly seeks reassurance unknowingly announces that their inner world depends upon someone else's choices. Nothing weakens personal influence faster than allowing another person to become the source of your emotional stability. This is where silence begins to reveal its true purpose. Silence is not an act of revenge. It is not a performance designed to provoke guilt or curiosity. When used as manipulation, it quickly loses its strength because manipulation is driven by the hope of controlling another person's emotions. Genuine silence is different. It is born from self-command. It reflects the decision to master your own reactions before attempting to change anyone else's behavior. There is a quiet confidence in those who do not rush to fill every uncomfortable moment with words. They understand that every emotion does not require immediate expression. Every misunderstanding does not deserve endless explanation. Every distance does not demand pursuit. They recognize that patience often uncovers truths that desperation conceals. While others exhaust themselves chasing certainty, they remain observers of human nature, allowing actions to reveal what words often hide. Consider how easily people become accustomed to constant attention. What is available every moment gradually loses its significance. Appreciation fades because the mind quickly adapts to certainty. This is not cruelty. It is simply the way perception functions. People instinctively place greater value on what appears intentional rather than automatic. Your attention is no exception. When it is given without limits, it slowly becomes expected instead of appreciated. The mistake many people make is believing that silence changes another person. In reality, its first effect is upon you. It interrupts the cycle of emotional impulse. It creates distance between feeling and action. Within that distance, clarity begins to emerge. You stop asking, how can I make this person value me? And begin asking a far more important question, why have I allowed another person's response to determine my own value? That single question shifts the battlefield from external approval to internal mastery. Once this transformation begins, your behavior naturally changes. You no longer chase conversations that have already ended. You no longer seek validation from those unwilling to offer respect. Your attention returns to your own purpose, your own ambitions, and your own discipline. Ironically, this quiet independence often alters how others perceive you. Not because you are playing a psychological game, but because genuine self-possession is difficult to ignore. People are naturally drawn toward those who appear complete without demanding constant recognition. Power has always belonged to those who govern themselves before attempting to influence others. Anyone can react, anyone can argue, anyone can plead for understanding. Very few possess the patience to remain composed when emotion urges immediate action. That composure is not weakness. It is evidence that your identity no longer depends upon winning every conversation or preserving every connection at any cost. Remember this: the strongest silence is never used to make someone chase you. It is used to ensure that you never have to chase your own self-respect. And before you can understand how silence influences others, you must first understand why emotional control is the highest form of power. Power is rarely revealed in moments of comfort. It is exposed when emotions are challenged. Anyone can appear calm when life unfolds according to expectation, but the true measure of a person's strength is discovered when disappointment, rejection, or uncertainty enters the room. This is the moment where most people unknowingly reveal the position of their mind. They react before they think. They speak before they understand. They allow temporary emotions to make permanent decisions. In doing so, they surrender the one advantage that can never be replaced, the ability to govern themselves. Every emotional reaction carries information. Anger announces that something has gained access to your inner world. Desperation reveals fear of loss. Constant explanations reveal a need to be understood at any cost. None of these emotions are inherently wrong. They are part of being human. The danger begins when they become the force directing your actions. A person who cannot control their emotions gradually becomes predictable, and predictability is one of the easiest patterns for others to recognize. Observe how people behave when they feel ignored. Some immediately demand answers. Others flood conversations with unnecessary messages, hoping that persistence will repair emotional distance. Many become consumed by imagination, creating stories that have no connection to reality. Hours are spent interpreting short replies, delayed responses, or imagined signs of rejection. Without realizing it, they have allowed another person's behavior to occupy their thoughts, shape their mood, and determine the quality of their day. This is how emotional dependence quietly begins, not with dramatic events, but with countless small reactions that slowly erode inner stability. Emotional control does not ask you to suppress your feelings. It asks something far more difficult. It asks you to witness every emotion without immediately obeying it. There is a profound difference between feeling an impulse and becoming its servant. The first belongs to human nature. The second is a choice. The individual who develops the habit of observing emotions before acting upon them creates a space where wisdom can replace instinct. Within that brief pause lies the foundation of mature judgment. Silence becomes valuable because it protects that space. Instead of rushing to resolve discomfort, you allow time to reveal what emotion initially concealed. Many conflicts lose their importance after a single day of patience. Many misunderstandings disappear without explanation. Many people expose their true character simply by being given enough time to act according to their own nature. Impulsive reactions interrupt this process. Patience allows it to unfold. There is another consequence of emotional discipline that often goes unnoticed. It preserves dignity. Once spoken words cannot be recalled. Once anger has been expressed without restraint, its effects often remain long after the emotion itself has faded. Those who master themselves understand that temporary satisfaction is rarely worth lasting regret. They would rather remain silent than allow a passing emotion to define their character. This discipline also transforms perception. People naturally place greater trust in those who remain composed during uncertainty. Calmness suggests that a person possesses an internal foundation stronger than external circumstances. It does not mean they never experience fear, disappointment, or frustration. It means those emotions no longer dictate every decision they make. Quiet confidence is convincing because it reflects consistency rather than performance. Many mistakenly believe emotional control is designed to influence others. That understanding is incomplete. Its first purpose is to protect your own peace. When your emotional balance no longer depends upon another person's approval, rejection loses much of its power. Delayed responses lose their ability to create anxiety. Distance no longer feels like a threat to your identity. You begin responding according to your values instead of reacting to someone else's behavior. At this point, something subtle begins to change. Your conversations become more intentional. Your words become fewer but more meaningful. You stop explaining yourself to people committed to misunderstanding you. You stop chasing attention because your sense of worth no longer depends upon receiving it. Your energy returns to your own ambitions, your own discipline, and your own purpose. Others may notice this change, but whether they do or not becomes increasingly irrelevant because your greatest achievement is no longer influencing them. It is governing yourself. The strongest person in any emotional situation is not the one who wins every argument or receives the most attention. It is the one who remains faithful to reason when emotion demands surrender. Self-mastery is not displayed through dramatic gestures. It is built through ordinary moments where patience quietly defeats impulse, where discipline overcomes fear, and where silence preserves strength that reckless words would have wasted. And once you no longer allow emotions to control your actions, you begin to understand why silence naturally creates mystery instead of merely creating distance. Once you have learned to master your emotions, another truth begins to reveal itself. People are rarely fascinated by what they completely understand. The human mind is drawn toward what remains unfinished, uncertain, and difficult to fully explain. We often imagine that influence comes from revealing everything about ourselves, but history repeatedly suggests the opposite. Those who expose every thought, Every intention and every emotion leave very little for the imagination to explore. When nothing remains hidden, curiosity quietly fades. Think about how quickly familiarity transforms perception. The first conversation with someone captures your attention because every word carries the possibility of discovery. You wonder who they are, what they believe, and what lies beneath the surface. But if every opinion is immediately explained, every emotion instantly expressed, and every silence quickly broken, that sense of discovery disappears. The unknown becomes known, and what was once intriguing gradually becomes ordinary. This is not a lesson about becoming deceptive. Deception creates confusion, not respect. The deeper principle is restraint. Wisdom does not rush to display itself. Confidence does not constantly announce its presence. The strongest personalities rarely feel the need to explain every decision they make because they understand that actions possess a language more convincing than endless words. Many people become uncomfortable the moment silence enters a conversation. They mistake silence for weakness or assume it must immediately be filled with reassurance. Yet silence often performs a task that words cannot. It creates space. Within that space, people begin projecting their own assumptions, expectations, and emotions. They reveal more about themselves than they ever intended. While one person struggles to explain everything, the other quietly observes. Observation has always been one of the greatest sources of understanding because people rarely hide their character for long when given enough time. When someone constantly seeks to control every impression others have of them, they unknowingly expose insecurity. They attempt to remove every misunderstanding before it forms. They answer questions that were never asked. They defend themselves against accusations that do not exist. In doing so, they communicate something more powerful than their words. They reveal their fear of being misunderstood. Ironically, this fear often attracts the very judgment they hope to avoid. There is strength in allowing your character to speak before your explanations do. Those who possess genuine confidence understand that not every opinion deserves correction, not every silence requires interpretation, and not every misunderstanding must be resolved immediately. They trust time more than impulse because time eventually reveals consistency. While impulsive explanations often reveal anxiety, mystery should never become a performance. The moment silence is used only to manipulate another person's emotions, it loses its authenticity. People eventually sense the difference between quiet confidence and calculated distance. One comes from inner security, the other comes from the desire to provoke a reaction. Lasting influence belongs only to the first. This becomes especially important when emotions are involved. Many people believe they must always know where they stand, what the other person feels, and what every delayed response means. Their minds search desperately for certainty. Yet certainty cannot always be forced. Sometimes the wisest action is to stop searching for answers and begin watching behavior. Actions possess remarkable honesty because they require effort. Promises are easy to make. Consistent actions are far more difficult to imitate. The individual who remains patient gains another advantage. While others become consumed by emotional speculation, they remain connected to reality. They notice patterns instead of isolated moments. They evaluate character instead of temporary emotion. They become less interested in persuasive words and more interested in repeated behavior. This shift transforms judgment. Instead of reacting to appearances, they begin understanding motives. Perhaps the greatest misunderstanding about mystery is the belief that it exists only to attract attention. True mystery serves a different purpose. It protects your inner life from becoming controlled by the expectations of others. Not every ambition requires public approval. Not every struggle requires an audience. Not every victory needs celebration. The more peaceful you become with keeping certain parts of your journey private, the less dependent you become on external validation. Eventually, something remarkable happens. You stop trying to appear interesting because your attention is invested in becoming substantial. Your presence becomes quieter, yet more noticeable. Your words become fewer, yet more carefully chosen. People begin listening more closely, not because you demanded their attention, but because your restraint gives weight to everything you choose to say. Real mystery is never created by pretending to be distant. It is created naturally by a life guided by purpose, discipline, and self-respect. A life that does not need constant explanation to prove its worth. And once you understand that true influence grows from inner substance rather than constant visibility, You are ready to see why the person who needs the least validation often possesses the greatest power. By now, one truth should be becoming clear. Silence is not valuable because it changes another person. It is valuable because it changes you. Emotional control is not powerful because it forces respect. It is powerful because it frees you from the exhausting need to seek it. Once these lessons become part of your character, another transformation begins to take place. You stop asking how to make someone stay, and you begin asking a far more important question: what kind of life have I built if the departure of one person can completely destroy my peace? Most people never ask themselves this question. Instead, they spend years attempting to control circumstances they were never meant to control. They try to control another person's feelings, attention, loyalty, or affection. Yet every attempt to control another human being comes with an invisible cost. The more desperately you hold on, the more freedom you surrender. The more you depend upon another person's approval, the less authority you possess over your own emotional world. There is a strange paradox within human nature. The person who appears to need the least often possesses the greatest influence. This has nothing to do with arrogance or emotional coldness. It has everything to do with independence. When your happiness, confidence, and purpose exist independently of someone else's validation, your presence changes completely. You no longer speak from fear. You no longer act from desperation. Your decisions become guided by principles rather than emotions. Consider the difference between two individuals facing the same situation. One immediately begins negotiating for attention. They explain themselves repeatedly, apologize for things they have not done, compromise their values, and slowly abandon their dignity in exchange for temporary reassurance. The other remains calm. They recognize disappointment, but they refuse to let disappointment dictate their identity. They understand that affection cannot be forced and respect cannot be begged for. If another person chooses distance, they accept reality instead of fighting against it. One loses themselves trying to preserve a relationship. The other preserves themselves regardless of the relationship's outcome. This difference is subtle, yet it completely changes how people are perceived. Human beings instinctively recognize those whose lives revolve around external approval. Such individuals become predictable because every action seeks the same reward: acceptance. Predictable behavior is easily overlooked because it no longer reflects strength. It reflects dependency, rarely begins with dramatic sacrifice. It develops through countless small compromises. You stop pursuing your own ambitions because someone else becomes your priority. You neglect friendships, personal growth, and discipline in exchange for constant availability. Without realizing it, your identity gradually becomes attached to another person's presence. When that presence changes, your entire emotional foundation begins to collapse. True power emerges the moment you reverse this process. Instead of asking what another person can give you, you begin investing in qualities that no one can take away. You strengthen your discipline, you expand your knowledge, you develop your health, your purpose, your character, and your self-respect. Your life becomes too meaningful to revolve entirely around the unpredictable emotions of another individual. Ironically, this is often the point where your relationships improve, not because you are trying to create distance, but because your presence is no longer burdened by emotional need. Conversations become lighter because they are no longer driven by fear. Affection becomes genuine because it is freely given rather than silently demanded. You stop viewing relationships as places to escape loneliness and begin experiencing them as partnerships between two complete individuals. Many misunderstand emotional independence. They believe it requires becoming indifferent toward everyone. Nothing could be further from the truth. The strongest individuals are often capable of deep loyalty and genuine affection. The difference is that they never confuse love with dependence. They care deeply without abandoning themselves. They give generously without sacrificing their dignity. They remain committed without making another person responsible for their identity. There is profound freedom in reaching this state. Rejection no longer defines your worth. Silence no longer creates panic. Distance no longer destroys your confidence. You understand that another person's inability to recognize your value does not diminish your value itself. This realization cannot be borrowed from books or speeches. It must be earned through experience, reflection, and disciplined self-development. The greatest advantage of needing less validation is not that others begin noticing you more. That may happen or it may not. The real advantage is far greater. You become impossible to manipulate through praise or fear because your decisions no longer depend upon either. Approval becomes pleasant but unnecessary. Criticism becomes useful but not destructive. Your peace remains rooted within yourself instead of fluctuating according to someone else's emotions. This is the quiet confidence that cannot be imitated. It does not announce itself. It does not compete for attention. It simply exists steady and unmoved because it has discovered a truth that many spend their entire lives searching for. The strongest position you can ever occupy is the one where your self-worth is no longer dependent on anyone else's permission. And once you no longer seek constant validation, you become capable of seeing people exactly as they are, not as you desperately hope them to be. Once you stop seeking validation, your eyes begin to notice what your emotions once refused to see. This is one of the quiet rewards of emotional independence. When desire no longer clouds judgment, reality becomes impossible to ignore. People reveal themselves every day, yet most never notice because they are too occupied trying to preserve the image they have created in their own minds. They listen to promises instead of observing patterns. They become attached to potential instead of accepting reality. In doing so, they mistake hope for truth. Human nature has an interesting habit. It rarely reveals itself under pressure. It reveals itself through freedom. Give people complete freedom to choose, and eventually they will show you where their priorities truly lie. No interrogation is required. No dramatic confrontation is necessary. Time performs the work that emotion never can. Patience becomes a greater teacher than suspicion because people cannot endlessly pretend to be someone they are not. This is why strategic distance possesses such quiet power. Distance is not created to make another person suffer. It is created to remove emotional noise. When you constantly pursue, explain, remind, or seek reassurance, you interfere with the natural movement of reality. Your presence begins influencing every outcome. You never discover whether someone genuinely values your company because they are always responding to your effort instead of acting from their own intention. Imagine standing beside a lake during a violent storm. The water becomes so disturbed that you cannot see beneath the surface. Every attempt to look deeper only reveals more chaos. But the moment the wind settles, clarity returns without force. Human relationships often function the same way. Constant emotional reactions create turbulence. Strategic distance allows the water to become still enough for truth to appear. Many people fear distance because they confuse it with loss. They believe that if they stop initiating every conversation or chasing every misunderstanding, everything important will disappear. This fear often reveals a painful reality. They have placed their confidence entirely in effort rather than mutual respect. Yet relationships sustained only by one person's constant pursuit eventually become exhausting. Affection that survives only through pressure is rarely genuine affection. Real interest moves naturally in both directions. Distance also exposes another psychological pattern. Some individuals value what is consistently available only after it is no longer constantly present. This does not mean absence magically creates love. It simply removes distraction. When your attention is no longer guaranteed, people are forced to experience your absence without your interference. Some discover appreciation. Others remain completely unchanged. Both outcomes contain valuable information because they replace imagination with evidence. There is wisdom in allowing people to make their own decisions without attempting to guide every step. Those who truly respect you will eventually demonstrate that respect through action. Those who never intended to invest in the relationship will also reveal themselves, often more quickly than you expected. In either case, clarity replaces confusion, and clarity is always more valuable than comforting illusions. Many people spend years trying to decode mixed signals. They analyze every message, every conversation, every expression, hoping to uncover hidden meaning, yet consistent behavior rarely requires interpretation. A person's priorities become visible through repeated choices. If someone continually makes time for you, respects your boundaries, and contributes to the relationship, their actions already contain the answer. If they repeatedly create uncertainty, inconsistency, or indifference, that too is an answer. The mind seeks complicated explanations because simple truths are often difficult to accept. Strategic distance also serves another purpose. It restores perspective. When emotions are intense, every problem appears larger than it truly is. A delayed response feels like rejection. A disagreement feels permanent. But with distance comes proportion. You begin distinguishing temporary emotions from lasting patterns. You stop reacting to isolated moments and start evaluating the overall character of the relationship. This shift changes the questions you ask yourself. Instead of wondering, How do I make this person choose me? You begin asking, does this relationship deserve my continued investment? That question represents a complete reversal of power. Your attention moves away from earning approval and toward exercising discernment. You become the observer instead of the pursuer. You judge behavior instead of excusing it. There is a profound confidence in allowing reality to speak louder than emotion. You no longer force outcomes that resist you. You no longer chase answers that time will eventually provide. You understand that every person reveals their true priorities when given enough freedom, enough time, and enough responsibility for their own choices. Your task is not to manipulate those choices. Your task is simply to observe them with honesty. In the end, strategic distance is not about creating uncertainty for someone else. It is about removing illusion from your own mind. It allows truth to emerge without argument, without pressure, and without endless emotional struggle. Once truth becomes visible, your decisions become remarkably simple because they are no longer guided by hope alone. They are guided by reality. And when you learn to trust reality more than your emotions, you are finally prepared to discover that the greatest victory in any relationship is not mastering another person, but mastering yourself. After everything we have explored, one principle stands above all the others. Silence is temporary. Distance is temporary. Even influence is temporary, but character is permanent. A person who learns how to control another without first learning how to control themselves builds power on unstable ground. Sooner or later, emotion will expose every weakness that discipline failed to correct. This is why the greatest victory in any relationship is never convincing someone to stay. It is becoming the kind of person who remains whole whether they stay or leave. Most people spend years studying the behavior of others while remaining strangers to themselves. They can recognize another person's lies, but fail to recognize their own fears. They notice another person's manipulation, but ignore their own emotional dependence. They become experts at reading messages, expressions, and signals, yet never pause long enough to examine the motives guiding their own decisions. Self-knowledge is far more difficult than understanding another person because it demands honesty instead of imagination. There comes a moment in every person's life when they must choose between comfort and growth. Comfort whispers that your happiness exists somewhere outside yourself. It tells you that one person's approval will complete you, that one relationship will remove every insecurity, and that one conversation will finally bring lasting peace. Growth speaks very differently. It reminds you that no external victory can compensate for an undisciplined mind. Without inner stability, every success becomes fragile because your peace always depends upon circumstances you cannot control. This is why genuine strength begins in solitude. Solitude forces you to confront yourself without distraction. There are no constant conversations to silence your thoughts, no endless search for validation to occupy your attention. You begin noticing your habits, your fears, your impatience, and your hidden insecurities. At first, this process feels uncomfortable because the mind naturally avoids confronting its own weaknesses. Yet every weakness honestly acknowledged becomes an opportunity for discipline. Every fear understood loses a portion of its influence. Discipline is often misunderstood as something harsh or restrictive. In reality, discipline is an act of liberation. The disciplined individual is not controlled by passing emotions, temporary pleasures, or unpredictable circumstances. Their choices are guided by principles instead of impulses. They wake with purpose whether they feel motivated or not. They protect their dignity even when emotions tempt them toward desperation. They understand that consistency builds a life while impulse slowly destroys one. There is another quiet transformation that follows self-mastery. You stop measuring people by how they make you feel in a single moment and begin measuring them by the consistency of their character over time. You become slower to idealize and slower to judge. You recognize that everyone experiences moments of weakness, but patterns reveal far more than isolated events. This patient observation allows wisdom to replace emotional reaction. Relationships become clearer because your decisions are no longer driven by loneliness or fear. Many people mistakenly believe confidence is something they must display. They rehearse it through words, posture, or carefully constructed images. Yet authentic confidence rarely announces itself. It reveals itself through calm decisions made under pressure. It appears when you refuse to betray your values simply to gain temporary approval. It appears when you remain respectful without becoming submissive, and when you remain kind without becoming emotionally dependent. This kind of confidence cannot be borrowed from books or performances because it is built through repeated acts of self-discipline. Eventually, you reach a point where your greatest ambition is no longer to be admired. It is to become difficult to shake. Praise no longer intoxicates you because you understand its temporary nature. Criticism no longer destroys you because your identity is rooted in something deeper than public opinion. Whether someone chooses to remain in your life or quietly walks away, your purpose continues, your discipline continues, your self-respect continues. That is the foundation no one can remove from you. Perhaps this is the lesson hidden beneath every discussion of silence, emotional control, and psychological influence. The objective was never to make another person feel your absence. The objective was to ensure you never abandon yourself while pursuing another person's presence. When you stop chasing validation, you recover your attention. When you recover your attention, you recover your purpose. And when your purpose becomes stronger than your fears, your life begins moving according to your own direction rather than someone else's decisions. The strongest people are not remembered because they controlled every relationship they entered. They are remembered because they remained faithful to their principles when emotion invited compromise. They understood that power without character eventually collapses, while character quietly creates a form of influence that no circumstance can easily destroy. The world may continue changing, people may come and go, and relationships may begin or end, but the individual who has mastered their own mind carries something far more valuable than approval. They carry freedom. And in the end, the greatest power you will ever possess is not the ability to influence another person. It is the ability to remain true to yourself, regardless of who chooses to stay, who chooses to leave, or what life places in your path.